Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Caitlin Bristol, exhibitions developer at the National Building Museum. I'd like to welcome you all to this evening's program, Sukkah City, DC, Welcoming the Stranger. The National Building Museum tells stories and inspires curiosity about our built world, the places where we live, work, and play. Through our programs and exhibitions, we explore how the built environment affects us and how we can have an impact on it. The project we'll hear about tonight is a good example of a creative engagement with public space and of forging new partnerships and collaboration. The Sukkah City DC installation is on view now through October 3rd, presented by NBM, the Capital Jewish Museum, and the Edlavitch DC Jewish Community Center. We hope you visit the sukkahs, which are free of charge, on the museum's west lawn and at the DCJCC on 16th Street Northwest. A Hebrew word translated as booth, sukkahs are temporary structures built for the Jewish holiday of Sukkot. The week-long festival celebrates the fall harvest while recalling the Israelites' 40-year journey through the desert. Each year, Jewish families and communities build sukkahs where they share meals, entertain, sleep, and rejoice. Our sukkahs address the theme of welcoming the stranger with designs that highlight holiday traditions and the importance of community. Temporary architecture like these sukkahs encourage us to think about some of today's most pressing issues, like housing insecurity, the displacement of people and communities, both locally and globally, and how to confront the challenges of our changing climate. Technical guidelines, as per Jewish law, require that each structure have 3 sides and a partial view of the night sky through the roof, and be large enough to contain at least 2 people and a shared table. In addition, there must be an overhead screen made of only natural materials. I'd like to express our gratitude to the participating architecture firms for being game to embark on this design build challenge with us. Tonight, we'll hear from each team as they discuss their design inspiration and construction process for their sukkahs in the following order: A Complete Unknown, Esocoff and Ng Architects, Hord, Coplan, Macht, Knu Design and Cedar Architecture, Shinberg.Levinas, SmithGroup, and A. Robert Zweig. After their presentations, they will have time to answer your questions, so please submit those via the Q&A function in your toolbar. Finally, I'd like to give a huge thanks to the Capital Jewish Museum, our soon-to-be new neighbors, for their partnership on this project, and introduce Sarah Levitt, curator at CJM, who will be tonight's moderator and give us some background on the celebration of Sukkot in DC. Take it away, Sarah.
Thanks, Caitlin. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our program tonight. Victoria, if you wanted to start the slides. I'm going to show you a few photos from our collection. I was asked to kind of give a little background context into Sukkot and how it's been celebrated here in DC, and of course there's a million ways, but I went into our collection and found just a couple photos to just get us started in thinking about which types of groups have observed Sukkot in the city and what that has meant to them and to the history of Jewish Washington. So here we have the first slide, which is it's from 1944 during World War II. It's a couple service members being sponsored, I think, by the Jewish Welfare Board, and they are waving the lulav and etrog, which are some symbols of the holiday, kind of encompassing this aspect of the connectedness of the body and the earth. I'm not sure how spiritual these guys were feeling at the moment, but this is kind of a neat example. There was several thousand service members in DC stationed here during World War II, and this was an opportunity for Jewish Washington to host them in the sukkah. The next slide is a little different aspect of Sukkot. In this one, this is 1978. I guess you could tell that by the hair. This is at Lafayette Park in DC near the White House, and they are recognizing prisoners of conscience from the Soviet Union as part of the campaign to free Soviet Jewry. So in this case, they're holding photographs of prisoners of conscience and saying their names and telling the stories of these people and welcoming them into the sukkah kind of figuratively, which is a practice that a lot of people do in their sukkahs called ushpizin, where you kind of think of an ancestor or think of somebody that can't be with you for whatever reason, in this case because they were sentenced sentence to prison or labor camps in the Soviet Union. I was thinking, actually, after I saw the sukkahs on the lawn of the Building Museum this weekend, I walked over to see the memorial by the Washington Monument, the COVID-19 memorial, and I was thinking that actually has a lot of really beautiful connections to Sukkot as we think about welcoming people into our back into our lives or our hearts who can't be with us any longer. So this is from 1978. The next slide that you'll see is just a little later, probably from the 80s. This is at the Jewish Community Center in Rockville, Maryland. The JCC, as we know, moved up there in the late 60s, and this was part of their kind of community celebration. I included this one mostly because it has a paper chain, and I am a fan of paper chains in sukkahs. That was kind of my family celebration. Also some gourds, and you can see as Sukkot kind of becomes really increased in popularity in terms of family celebrations and community celebrations in the 80s, and you can really see that here. Our next slide will show, of course, the most important sukkahs in DC history, which occurred. This was from last Sunday at the Building Museum, and here's some of my colleagues at the Capitol Jewish Museum as we're celebrating kind of a reimagining of Sukkot as we think about that idea of welcoming the stranger. And I think, this week as we see the news during Sukkot of what's happening with the Haitian migrants at our border, we really, it gives us an opportunity to think about what audaciously welcoming the stranger means, and what we mean when we say that. It's a nice thing to say, and just to try to think about what it is that we mean. I read a bunch about the 1978 rally while I was putting my thoughts together, and the rabbi was actually Rabbi Listfield of Addis, Israel, who spoke at that rally with the Soviet Jews. And he said at the end of his remarks, he said, "The sukkah booth is vulnerable and fragile, just like us." And that kind of spoke to me. Here we are over a year and a half into the pandemic, and I think we can kind of all relate to that sentiment. So if we look at the next slide. This is just, of course, a rendering of the Capitol Jewish Museum, and I just want to encourage all of you to follow us on social and join our listservs and our mailing list, and look forward to us becoming part of the neighborhood in DC, and our building is under construction. Hopefully you've had the chance to walk by and see it. And we will be a venue for folks all over the DC area and much wider to connect with these kinds of stories, just these kinds of stories of how Jewish Washington has celebrated and in life of the city in the past, to reflect on that and to act in our own communities. And in this case, of course, with Sukkot, we think especially about tonight about welcoming a stranger. So I'm really excited to hear from the architects. I know that's what we're all here for. So let's get started. And I believe the first up in alphabetical order is A Complete Unknown.
Hello, hi, I'm Suman Sorg, and I am principal of A Complete Unknown. A Complete Unknown is a nonprofit design firm that tries to address the needs of the underserved. And we are involved in designing spaces that foster social equity, such as permanent supportive housing and housing for the homeless, community spaces in underserved neighborhoods, and also projects that preserve and restore nature, as well as address animal welfare. So next slide. When we thought of how can we do this in our sukkah, and we were very delighted. We were invited to participate. We thought about not just us humans that occupy this space, but also our fellow creatures, animals. And in the city, there are many, many birds and many, many ways that the birds are harmed by the city. They run into glass. The light pollution in the city disorients them, and that's really bad for migrating birds. because of pollution, the water is not clean enough for them to drink. And of course, the habitat is being destroyed. And these creatures help us exist. They do, fertilize the ground. They pollinate and disperse the seeds, as well as, most importantly, they eat bugs that we don't like at all. And so when we were thinking about our sukkah, we were thinking, how can we do something not just for us, but for these birds as well? So next slide. So we thought of incorporating birdhouses in our sukkah. So our sukkah simulates tree-like structures. These are made of fast growth wood that's locally sourced. And it's set in a circle so that it creates a environment inside for people to get together and be able to see each other, and then from the outside, the birds to see a possibility of sanctuary for themselves. So next slide. Here you have it in context. It was a lot of fun to work on. We designed the structure so that it would be stable. Even the bench inside is part of the structure. And when we put this up, we thought of the kids that were going to come to this event. And so we put the nest low enough for them to see them. And we also put out a sheet where people could sign up, and if they wanted a birdhouse, we would send it to them after this installation was taken down. And we are hoping that this will encourage other people to incorporate spaces for not just humans, but other creatures around us. And we hope that our effort will not only will not do any harm, but actually help to undo the harm.
My name is Henry, and I'm one of two of Esocoff and Ng Architects. And my partner here is Jacob Esocoff. And this is our sukkah, which is at the DCJCC. We're a practice that just started actually in New York a month ago, and this is our first build project, so we're really excited. And want to thank the National Building Museum and the JCC and the Capital Jewish Museum for inviting us to participate. So when we got the brief, as myself, someone who is not part of the faith, we did some research onto what the sukkah is, and we were inspired a lot by the traditional concept of the sukkah itself as a kind of temporary dining pavilion. And we thought in some ways that it's kind of almost all right as a ceremonial space that is designed to promote community and conversation and fellowship around a dining table, around a meal. So in designing our sukkah, we wanted to reinforce those characteristics of the sukkah. And we wanted to distill some of those traditional elements. So we designed it to be essentially 10 chairs, which gives the structure its name, minyan, for the kind of 10-person quorum that forms the minyan in Jewish faith. And those 10 chairs form the walls of the structure. And from those walls hangs this floating roof, and the table hangs from the center of that. We like the idea of the circle as a form that promotes social space. And we were kind of inspired also by the idea of designing an outdoor dining pavilion, especially this year when that's, I guess, gotten new meaning. And with COVID, that's really tested community and social ties. Next. So here are just some of the details of the components that make up our sukkah. At the top left, you see elements of the floating roof and the kind of central oculus that from which the table hangs. And down low, you see, excuse me, components of the chairs. The structure was designed to be using, very standard components from Home Depot, available at Home Depot, and could be disassembled easily using kind of reversible connections. And my partner Jacob will go into more detail on how we built and designed the structure.
Well, here's some occupants of the sukkah enjoying it, both for conversations and having a laugh and just having a good time. So this was our proof of concept moment here. And next, I think we'll have a time-lapse video of the construction process. Great. So this is a 2-minute video that takes place over the course of 3, maybe 4 days. What you see us doing here first is laying down extra sheets of plywood on the platform that was provided to us by the DCJCC. The extra sheets of plywood serve to ground the sukkah by giving the bolts that we screw down into them more bite. And then we painted over a kind of neutral gray ground. And that was day 1. So day 2, we started by drawing a circle. There's me and Henry drawing the circle on the platform and laying out in a circle the legs of the chairs and the seats of the chairs. And what was interesting to us was that it actually really wasn't a perfect circle at first. But as we started to combine more and more components, the structure itself started to become a circle. And so by the end, it was almost exactly like the digital model measured to be, which was an 11'6" diameter circle. And here you see the backs of the chairs coming on that are suspended by wood dowels and rope. Here you see us screwing the legs down into that platform, which is a very long process. And then here are what we call ladders that extended up to become the structure for the roof. And these simply, we put one bolt in on each side and then they swung up and then we bolted the rest. So that was actually a very quick setup for those. And then here, the roof starts to be suspended by the tops of those ladders. And we used a number of turnbuckles and stainless steel cables, which were great because they allowed us to raise and lower the roof and make sure that it was completely level. So that when we started running rope around through those beams, those floating beams, everything was level for the plants that we used to suspend from the roof, which was, by the way, bamboo grass. So here you start to see us hang the grass, and that was basically the last step of the process for building the sukkah. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Esther, and I'm here with Jordan. We're here from Hord, coplan, macht, which is a design firm based in Baltimore. So our sukkah was trying to concentrate on the theme of welcoming a stranger. So when we think about a stranger, we're talking about how a stranger and even a foreigner is a temporary condition, which is like the sukkah. So somebody's only a stranger until you welcome them and make conversation, and they can go from a temporary condition of stranger to a friend, which is a more permanent condition. So our design is a circle, and the sukkah walls are supposed to symbolize a hug or an embrace, and we wanted to use our curving walls to reinforce this. And our whole design kind of springs forth from the table, which is a social element that we wanted to focus on, which is an element that brings people together. Again, taking somebody, welcoming them to your table, and making them a friend. And springing forth from this table is this palm branch, which is the spine and the backbone of society and communities, looking out for one another and making people feel comfortable. We used 54 branches of bamboo to create this, which is a multiple of 18, which is an important number in Judaism. And then spiraling around this, we wanted to use a building material that standing alone doesn't really have much weight, but when it's put together, it can help define space. And we use string. And it also creates this kind of transparent layer that you can kind of see people at the table, walk over to them, say hi, interact. And with this design, we really just wanted people to reach out, interact with one another, and make a friend. So really just elevating this temporary sense of unfamiliar stranger to facilitate a permanent connection with ourselves, a spiritual higher power, and the world around us. And Jordan's going to talk a little bit about the fabrication.
Hi, everyone. So I really enjoyed learning a lot about this holiday, and I'm pretty jealous of that about this tradition because I'm a maker for sure. And my role at Hord, coplan, macht is to help manifest our installations that we build throughout the year. But I was really happy to learn about all the symbology and meaning, and was pleased with the result. It definitely is the most transparent sukkah, and it does break a few of the Jewish traditional laws, but we were happy about being able to see people and really drive that welcoming the stranger tenet into our design. I'll just quickly talk about how this evolved. We fabricated almost everything inside of our shop that you'll see in the background of my video, and I have some minions that helped me along the way. We wanted to have the center post be natural, but unfortunately, due to weight concerns, we ended up going with PVC pipe and 3D printed parts. So those are the unnatural elements that we unfortunately couldn't get around. The 3D printed parts really helped us with creating the even spacing that we need. And I think that it came pretty close to the digital model, which is always a big plus. I enjoyed in the last presentation how it was revealed that what you model is not always what gets built, but this was in both cases pretty successful. So that's all I have to share. Happy to take questions later. And thank you all.
Hi, I'm Scott Knudsen with Knu Design, and my partner is Deborah Bulow with Cedar Architecture. And what really struck us in the program was the issues of temporariness and impermanence, displacement, kind of urban change, and a sense of insecurity. And we really started seeing parallels between the historical traditions between Sukkot and the contemporary situation with so many volatile circumstances in our lives today, ranging from January 6th to say their names to COVID, obviously. Everybody is going through volatile change. And we saw this as an opportunity to find the most humble of materials that has been discarded and transform it into a place of recentering, elevation, and spirituality. And so our design process, we spent a lot of time back and forth with each other, thinking about beautiful forms that would have been great, but then really focusing back on that mission. And we said, what's the material that would best communicate that? And it was pallets, which are used for gentrification primarily, and then discarded. And we said, how can we use pallets to make a place of belonging and recreate the experience that one went through in wandering the wilderness and that we've all gone through recently. So next slide, that image that you just saw was as you approach the building, you feel attracted, you see layers here in and out of the building. Well, you call it a building, but in and out of the space. Next. And as we wander around the building, you see you want to go in, but we've put in some subtle cues to discourage you from entering there. But of course, if you want to, that's fine. And then you will have to wander to find the correct entrance. Next slide. And eventually you discover this place of elevation and recentering when you look up. And I think the next image really takes you through this cycle that we choreographed, which little video of going around it. So you're attracted to go in, you approach the entrance, but the plants discourage you. There's actually a little sign that discourages you that you can't see. And then you go around the backside, everything feels very disparate, very dark, very confusing. You're not sure if this is an approachable space anymore. Then you see this dark volume. And if you push forth and carry through into the darkness and go through the tight and narrow spaces, you end up emerging into this spiritual space where you can take a moment, breathe, recenter yourself, kind of redefine your journey, and then move out through this filter of plants and grasses and bamboo overhead. It's a little bit of a cleansing opportunity. I'll pass it over to Deborah, my partner, and we'll tell you a little more about our thoughts.
Thank you, Scott. And thank you for welcoming us here tonight. I think I just really wanted to reiterate this concept of welcoming the stranger and how relevant that has felt through this entire process of building and being a part of this community, and being a part of this design process. The stranger, as in Scott and I very personally, each operating in our own individual design worlds in our small design practices, and coming forward to be part of this larger design community. So I think we have felt welcomed, and we have enjoyed welcoming others into the space that we've designed. It's been a really pleasurable experience. And thank you.
And we really saw other parallels in that building of community throughout this entire event, that these are two museums coming together. You know, this is an entire, Jewish community coming together with the secular world. And there's just so many community building things happening here that we're happy to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much for the National Building Museum and the Jewish Museum. I'm here with Zoa Monmari and also with Maria Gorodskaya. That's my partner. So this is a beautiful holiday, and this is one of, actually, for us, one of the most beautiful holidays in the Jewish tradition, is because, like, once a year for 1 week, we go back to nature. So it's like to leave all the comforts of everyday life and to go back for 1 week to something that is very natural, humble, and simple. So it reminds us how to go back, and to remind us also for the 40 years and the wandering in the desert. So this is something that we wanted to celebrate, and we really focused to do something structured that is going to elevate this kind of a concept, something that will be very simple, and that's the way that we call it, do and do, because the concept was to follow with all the traditions in terms of how to be built and what is the purpose of the sukkah. It's a temporary structure that have to be very simple to assemble, very simple to fabricate, very simple to disassemble, very simple to transport, and very simple to storage. This is a structure that normally used to be wandered in the desert, but in our case, something that you have to storage and rebuild it every year. So this is something that we wanted to accomplish. The next step, next slide, please. And you can see one of the things that we wanted to do is to create something was more architecture that will be attractive for the people to come, but also to give some privacy. And you can see the way that we have the slots, that those are made by plywood. So it's a very simple construction. It's just a 4x8 sheet of plywood. But then the slot in between, you can see that the screen is a little bit deeper in the bottom, more open in the middle, and completely open on the top. The reason is because when you are seated inside, you should have a little more privacy. When you stand up, you can see more the context around you. And then overall, there's much more air coming in and out. And it's completely built in natural materials. Next one. So then you can see the inside and the difference between, this is something that we really appreciated when we built it first in my house to see if everything is going to be okay or not, how easy it's going to be assembled. This assemble, we assembled in only 3 hours. That was very, very successful for us because something had to be easy to, like we were saying before, put it in and out, and then disassemble in only 30 minutes. But what we were very surprised and nicely surprised is the different feeling between the interior and the exterior. As you can see in the exterior, it's very plain and soft, but when you come inside, because the sun, the shadows, and the different textures, how beautiful the texture and the vision that you can see the sky. So I don't know, Maria, can you talk?
So this was very important for us, I think, just built on our history of working with Jewish congregations. And it was really a special project to be able to participate on this and have this charrette. I think it's also very well timed with the last year and a half that we've all kind of been locked away, and to really be able to come out and to have this community focused event and to maybe share something from our culture and our heritage and have people from the community come and see our structure and see all the sukkahs and to participate in this event. And so I think the timing of the project made it even that much more special for us all.
Good.
My name is Sven Shockey. I'm design director at SmithGroup. So I'll walk you through the thinking behind our sukkah. So it's titled Neshama, the Hebrew word that means both soul and breath. And the design is a contemporary reinterpretation of the sukkah, the structure used to celebrate the Jewish holiday of Sukkot. But it's informed by specific events of our time that we all know well at this point: the global pandemic, refugee and immigration crises, climate disasters, and reckoning of racial relations. So the project team sought to explore the daily complexities that we face with a structure that embraces these contradictions, and you'll see in a really living, organic way. Next slide, please. The design features 54 rotating fabric panels, a module of 18. I think other teams use that symbology, the number in the Jewish tradition whose letters equate to the Hebrew word for life. Like the expanding pleats on face coverings worn during the COVID pandemic, the twisting action opens the perimeter of the sukkah and recalls the act of inhaling and exhaling. It also reveals a blue and green tint applied to the interior face of the panels, which creates a gradient effect and grounds the sukkah between earth and sky. Next slide, please. So you see, the sukkah, when you first see it, it's very neutral and simple from the exterior, with references to simple tent-like structures, or even, again, the fabric of a mask. But the walls are porous in all directions, inviting entry or connection, views, light, and uneven wind. Some of the fabric panels on the perimeter have been rotated at the base to twist, to open them up and express the hint of color within. And then as you enter, you're immersed in these vibrant colors of nature, a gradient that was created with over 20 different shades that range between green and blue. Next slide, please. So here you see some details, and you notice that you can't see any columns holding up the structure. The structural columns are actually concealed between layers of fabric panels, so they're not expressed, and the roof structure appears to float. The sky is then framed in layers of different scale geometry. The fine geometric filigree of the ceiling is created by winding hundreds of lengths of yarn across a perimeter ring. So a little bit about the team. We had about 15 architects and engineers working together to design the sukkah. And as you heard from some of the other teams, I think just that was a kind of an act of togetherness that we all really appreciated. About half the team was familiar with the concept of the sukkah and had lots of anecdotes, and the other half of the team knew nothing about them, and we could sort of learn about that really kind of fascinating tradition. Most of the sukkah was assembled first behind our office to make sure it fit together and to work out details, and it was taken down and then built on the building museum grounds. The geometric threading at the top was all done at the building museum site and then raised into a position once the next slide, please. So the wheels you see at the bottom rotate in order to twist the fabric panels and therefore to open them, and a bolt keeps the wheels in place. This allows the sukkah to be experienced in a large number of configurations, expressing various degrees of opening and openness and invitation. So as the design team, we were very encouraged to see how the sukkah was experienced by the public of all ages, the experience of light and shadow, the sense of exploration, discovery, and delight. And as we reconcile what it means to shield and protect while trying to create a more inclusive society, the sukkah is an attempt to create a place of welcome to be shared by all peoples and cultures and religions. And I think kind of our team experienced just that from all the teams kind of building the sukkahs on site and then seeing the public in place. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. First, thank you to the National Building Museum, Capital Jewish Museum, and the JCC for the opportunity to participate in this incredible event. And an extra thanks to the JCC for allowing me to take over their parking lot, which these days sees a lot of activity. Working with the theme of welcoming the stranger, I began to think not only about the stranger, the visitor, the refugee, but also the resident or the one doing the welcoming. These two people or groups they're by definition different. The visitor's feet pause only briefly as part of their larger journey, while residents' feet are more firmly planted on the ground. But these two groups or these two people are unified. They're unified by a common need for shoes, which sort of drove the idea of the sukkah. And incidentally speaks to my own personal history and career, which is based in retail design. So the structure itself, and you're seeing the rendering here on screen, is a light framework made of readily available materials with 4 open corners that are representative of the 4 species or elements of Sukkot. The walls are a simple grid system of wood and aluminum plates, which allows for light and air to pass through. Also gives a clear view in and a clear view out of the sukkah. So the idea here is to invite the community to gather inside, experience it from both the outside and the inside. More importantly, the walls are intended to encourage the community to participate in the building of the sukkah itself. Again, linking the visitor and the resident. So what does this mean? Next slide, please. So with help from the JCC and Martha's Table, we invited visitors to bring shoes to the sukkah, to box them in one of the available boxes we had for them, which I call building blocks, and place them in one of the many slots that make up the walls of the sukkah. So over time, the walls transformed from fully open to partially open to almost completely closed, changing the feeling and the experience and the structure as the play of light and shadow evolved with each donation. So in essence, the sukkah was aiming to build community by bringing these two groups together, but also allowing the community to build the sukkah. So further to this idea of community involvement, I placed a group of lightweight drums. Next slide, please. Inside the sukkah, you can see them in the lower corner there, which were meant for visitors to use. They would, as they came and visited the sukkah, they would move them, place them, just interpret them however they'd like. Are they seats? Are they tables? They're meant to be whatever people want them to be or need them to be to enable people to gather and celebrate, which is the true essence of the holiday of Sukkot. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. All right. Well, we have the opportunity to take some questions now. Please do populate the Q&A. It's on the bottom of your screen. Or you can ask them in the chat and we'll get those too. I encourage all the panelists to look at the chat because there's a lot of really wonderful, positive affirmations of your work. So that's great to hear. I really appreciated all of your comments. While we're kind of waiting for more questions, I know that this one was in the chat and also we spoke a little bit before, and I know that we've been getting a lot of these questions at both museums. Does anyone want to comment on what happens to these sukkahs after Sukkot is over, after they come down on October 3rd. I do want to mention that they are up until October 3rd, so if you haven't had the chance to see them, please come over to both sites and take a look. But if anyone has something interesting you thought of while you were putting it up, how what's going to happen to it later, whether the materials get recycled, or if anyone has a good story, make sure you're on mute, please. Thank you. Unless you're answering the question, why don't you, any of our panelists, want to pop in and say, or is this something you're thinking about for next year, maybe doing one that could be more mass produced, or is this something interesting to you to think about what happens to your sukkah after the program?
As I mentioned before, and the purpose of the do and do was to create something very easy to assemble and to disassemble and store it, and was always created an idea that maybe we can duplicate for other people to use and to fabricate and so on. So it's easy to do it. And regarding our, we were thinking to donate it to, we were inquired actually to sell it, but we are thinking to donate in some of the congregations that we know or other institutions. But the good thing is about, again, to be practical, to be able to duplicate and to be able to share with the community.
Great, thank you. Anyone else have any ideas about? Yeah,
for woven, ours is not simple, but if anybody would like to help us disassemble it, you're welcome to take it to your house. We'd love to give you some instruction on how it goes together, because it's not straightforward. But if anybody would like to have it, you can help with our disassembly, and just reach out to us through the contacts here.
For Minion, we've studied how the components would break down into a compact form. So each of those chairs breaks down into 3 pieces. And if you stack all those pieces in a compact manner, it occupies a 4'6" by 4'6" plan area that's 8 feet tall. While the entire when put together, it's about a 12-foot diameter.
Okay, if no one else is jumping in on that one, and you can feel free to kind of jump in and re-look at some of the earlier questions as well. One of the questions being asked is was a kind of a couple that related to Jewish law, and how that kind of impacted. First of all, what kind of instructions did you get, especially those of you who are not Jewish, but even those who are, maybe you haven't built your own sukkahs before. How did you kind of find out what the Jewish law was, and what was kind of the most challenging aspect, and maybe something that you didn't quite reach necessarily there? Maybe, I know some of you mentioned they weren't totally kosher, but what did you find was the most challenging aspect of Jewish law to incorporate?
Well, let's start by congratulating Salo on having the only kosher sukkah. So good job. I think even there was a rabbi participating in the early dialogues who didn't want to be too harsh, frankly, on the literal text of the law, because this is somewhere between a spiritual place and an art installation. So he was well aware of that, and so I think that's maybe why some of the groups deviated, some more, some less. Salo, no deviation at all. He even got extra confirmations from additional rabbis.
Yeah, when we were designing ours, it was the first time I'd ever heard that term, but it was so universal, I felt. So many migrations have happened over the years, between, say, my own family was displaced from Pakistan to India in the 1940s, and how they traveled, some on land, and what they experienced on the way. So I thought, it was really much more universally experienced than just in the Jewish faith.
Actually learned during the building of it and during the viewing of it that my sukkah had broken a few rules. One specifically was that no opening greater than 3 hand widths is allowed But the interesting part was that once the sukkah became full of shoeboxes, the walls no longer had the openings. So I guess it became legal or kosher as the community joined in the process.
I love that, the idea of becoming more and less kosher as the installation continues. That's really neat.
I need to add that mine became very kosher because Scott gave me the bamboo. If not, it wouldn't be so kosher. So he was helping me to finish the Sukkot. So that's a very good collaboration between the architects.
Part of the community building.
Exactly. So was very happy that I had Scott next to us.
You know, as to the very first question as to what will happen, what can happen to these, I just wanted Max from our office to answer that. He was the chief builder of this, and he's done it in a way that we can give part of it away. How about you, Max? Can you answer this?
Yeah, happily. Yeah, it was a pleasure constructing this sukkah, and we had talked about kind of like the future of what might happen to the birdhouses. So we thought that it might be nice to kind of disperse the birdhouses around the community to kind of go with the idea of helping to helping to improve the bird habitat after the life of the sukkah. So if anyone does want a birdhouse, they can reach out to us, and we can accommodate sending a birdhouse to you and keeping that kind of message going.
We had 13 takers on Sundays, but we got about 50 birdhouses. So there's a lot.
Oh, yeah, we have plenty of birdhouses.
As a follow-up, somebody was asking if any birds tried to make their home in but I guess we didn't have bird seed in them, so.
Yeah, we didn't, but we did see monarch butterflies come. So that was interesting.
That's
it takes time for birds to discover these kinds of things. So I think, it'll be, if we can put some seeds in them, I'm sure they'll be very useful.
Sarah, just going back to what you said about this, sukkah being kosher, just from this experience, many of them aren't, but I think we're using this symbol as an exhibit to facilitate conversation, about concepts, difficult topics, or even just learning a new culture. I mean, just seeing the structure, people are walking around, what is that? And they learn something new. So I think it was a great success.
Oh, absolutely. I can interpret even the word kosher to mean different things, right? And that idea of people, just exactly as you said, of welcoming people, and when you were talking about strangers becoming friends, because that's how things work when you actually meet people, and maybe when you meet these actual sukkahs, they become kosher in a different kind of a way, which is kind of a neat thing to think about. As you were just talking about, and many of you have mentioned, observing members of the public, especially kids, maybe running through your sukkahs. Did you all have the chance to do that? And do you want to comment on anything that you found surprising or expected or unexpected about how the public used your sukkah?
I'd like to comment on that if I could. It was actually one of my favorite parts of this experience, and that Scott and I in particular put a set of rules on how you enter and use our sukkah. And we sort of debated on whether or not there were merits to doing that, but we thought, well, we're going to put the rules and then we'll see how people react or respond to them, but we're not going to put strong rules. We're doing just whispers of rules in there. So we just kind of wrote, this is where you enter, this is where you exit. We put plants in front to just suggest, don't walk in here, just look, and entice people to sort of walk around. And on Sunday, being there, we were both there for most of the day on Sunday. It was really enjoyable to see how everyone responded slightly differently, and how some people would go around in the way that we anticipated and we wanted somebody to interact by going around and entering through the back and then kind of coming inside. And as you come in, you sort of see the view lifts your gaze up, and not everyone did that, but many people did, and it was just very pleasurable to watch how people would experience that. And the children in particular, they had so much fun. It was really fun to watch them. In fact, one kid on Friday came running around, and he had so much fun running around there that he brought his family back on Sunday. He came to enjoy all the sukkahs even more. So yeah, watching the community was really a great aspect of it.
I just want to add, so for our pavilion, which when we opened on Sunday, there was a point when we had a minion, so 10 people, so one person in each seat. And, we had a quite lively conversation with people from different backgrounds and kind of who didn't know each other. And afterwards, one of the people came up to me and said that he thought, being in this space really promoted a really special kind of conversation because of the way you could see everyone's face, and there was kind of ample room, and it felt really comfortable to kind of sit there and kind of spend time. So I found that really heartwarming. And then another person told me that they really liked having the high chair, so the back is kind of above your head even, and it kind of felt dignified to kind of be sitting in a chair like that. So it was a reaction that was really meaningful to me.
I could also jump in super quickly. We really wanted to kind of engage kind of like younger audiences too. So we lowered some of the birdhouses so the kids are able to see them, so they're not so hidden and high up. And the other thing that I noticed during the community day was that, and I really appreciated, was that people were really congregating in the bench and sitting around in a circle and talking to each other and having meals there too, which I thought was really wonderful. So it was really lovely to see everybody kind of using the sukkahs and enjoying them, and I hope they continue to do so over the next week.
Yeah, I think it helps that it's a circle so that people actually look at each other, when they're sitting. So I saw a lot of people just sitting and meeting people they'd never met before and introducing themselves.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that half of the proposals or solutions were circles, so which is great.
So I had the added benefit of being at the JCC, and during the building process, I got to meet a lot of the staff of the JCC, and I got to hear great intended plans. We're going to have a cocktail party here. We're going to gather our drama group. We're going to do X, Y, Z. So it was really nice to hear that this sukkah has life beyond the debut day.
Just to add a little bit of my experience, first of all, it was wonderful to see all the other architects and to have a relationship and to talk with them and to understand the different point of view. That was wonderful. But then I went to the sukkah and I saw a lady seated in the floor because we don't have benches, and was a little curious because I didn't understand if she was doing okay or not. So I asked, and she said, no, actually I am doing very well, thank you. I am enjoying being in the floor because we don't have any tables or anything or chairs, and grounded, and I'm enjoying the light and the shadow from the bamboo. So for me, that was a beautiful experience, not to see that people, even in that kind of rush, she was able to just to sit and relax and to be there quiet in the sukkah. That is actually the purpose of the sukkah, to be grounded and to be part of the nature again. So that was very, very nice for us to see that.
That's wonderful. I love hearing your thoughts on having the public interact. Is there anyone else who hasn't been able to comment on that, who wants to jump in?
I was just going to say I enjoyed definitely seeing the public interact. I mean, I enjoyed actually just being able to walk into the other sukkahs too after experiencing the process, and I really enjoyed just walking through everybody's sukkah to experience it, firsthand, and all the thinking that went into it. And I noticed in a number of them, again, like the kids are always a good sign, when there's something interesting to explore. The kids take immediately the first ones to take advantage of that. So, but the kids would kind of run around and be able to find things and hide. But that allowed actually then sometimes some of the adults to actually talk and engage in a conversation, because their kids are actually super occupied and engaged, and you could have you could start talking to the other adults in the space. So that was kind of interesting.
That's great. I did notice on Facebook, my rabbi's daughter was sitting, and she was pictured on Facebook in every single sukkah, eating in every single one. Just cover all her bases. It's a mitzvah to eat in the sukkah. So that was really nice. Okay. Well, one thing actually that you just brought up that I'm going to pick up on was the opportunity you mentioned to walk into other firms' sukkahs. Did anyone here on the panel want to ask a question of each other? Was there something in somebody else's sukkah that you thought, oh, I should have tried that, or that was super cool, or hopefully positive things, but or a question for one another?
I have a question, I guess, for any of them. I mean, we all designed it and then we all built it, but we all know that there's a lot of space in between where things go wrong. So I guess what was the biggest challenge of taking something, the small thing in your mind, and then trying to construct it? Was it like a fabrication thing? Was it a design thing? I guess one thing that you were able to work through?
Oh my God, the foundations. That was almost a fail. The ground was so hard. Of course, ours is tall, and we're worried about it blowing over, so we needed a lot of tie back. And it took us 2 days to get 3 boards on the ground from which we could build the sukkah. So
I think we took your lead with the gas-powered auger. We had to do the same thing.
Did you get the certificate of occupancy?
It's in the mail.
It will arrive in 2 weeks.
The CRA is going to go to check.
There was one thing I was a little bit disappointed about, and that was that we weren't allowed to put bird seed in the bird houses because we didn't want to attract rats or squirrels. So, I think the symbolic meaning of what we were trying to achieve was still achieved, but it would have been interesting to see if we could have attracted other animals.
In Minyan, our sukkah, we have a lot of different size and types of bolts and screws and clips. And it was very difficult to track them down in all the different Home Depots in the District, Maryland, and Virginia region. And shout out to Phil Esocoff for going to so many of those with myself to track down hundreds of different types of bolts.
Yeah, I'll say full disclosure, my husband is a builder, and without him, we would not have had this done. I think we underestimated the intensiveness of having to build this structure ourselves. So I'll do another shout out to my husband for making sure that it actually stood up.
I agree. It's really important to have a builder. And so we're very lucky in our firm to have Max, who is available right now to answer questions, because he's an excellent architect and an excellent carpenter. It's so lucky to have that.
Very kind of you to say, Suman. Luckily, we didn't experience too many difficulties aside from the weather that one day on Thursday. Luckily, we didn't see the rain on Friday, so we had a solid full day of building, which was really helpful, but the Thursday was not great.
So for me, being based in New York, it was a question: how am I going to get this done? And I actually didn't have time to put a whole lot of thought into it. What I found was that in just sharing the concept of this and just sharing the fact that I was involved in this process, people were very intrigued and started to come forward. So a contractor who I've worked with for years said, "Well, we can build it." And they stepped forward, thankfully, and built it, because it certainly wouldn't have happened without them. And the sukkah originally mine was meant to not have any greenery on the roof. But again, in speaking with people, they said, well, you can't have a sukkah without greenery on top or inside. And I was saying, well, yes, you can. I'm going to. And they said, no, no, no. And so next thing I knew, a friend was on a train from New York to DC and stringing greenery and flowers and plants and things from the top of it, all the way up until the day of, when a good friend of mine, a family member effectively in DC, was hacking hydrangea from her garden and up on a ladder on her 72nd birthday, planting flowers in the top of the sukkah. So again, it's this whole idea of community that really became so apparent to the whole process that made it that much easier for me.
That's great. We just have a couple more questions, so unless you all can think of other ones that you want to ask each other, I just have a few more. I did want to make sure that everybody saw like the most important comment in the chat, which is that somebody mentioned that they'd been to Sukkah City in New York City, and this one was better. So I always like to point out where DC can be more creative and more imaginative than even New York City. So that's wonderful to see, and I'm sure it would get even more creative every year. I mentioned when I was looking at the one of the pictures of kind of the historical Sukkot pictures that I was showing, the paper chain in one of them, and that kind of hits me right in the heart. Paper chains do, but I was curious if any of you on any of your teams who are Jewish or who have observed Sukkot before had any kind of connection, any family traditions or community traditions that you were able to incorporate in your sukkahs?
I can briefly speak to this. I'm Jewish. My family never had a sukkah growing up, but I lived in a Russian Jewish neighborhood in Brooklyn. And when I was younger, I would always see them going up, and I was always very curious about them. And then I finally asked like my parents, what are these? And they explained the holiday to me. And I will say that I think this experience has sort of been a really great honor to be able to work on building my own sukkah, not having had one growing up. I think the only thing that's left for me to do is to, before it comes down, to go and dine in there in person so that I complete the mitzvah.
Perfect.
I am Jewish. I'm sorry. And we used to build a sukkah for when my girls, I have 3 girls, they were young. So I know exactly what it is to build a sukkah. What it means that the effort to put it together and so on, and the bolts, and that nobody helps you. So then maybe that was the reason that when we started to do our sukkah here, we thought, okay, let's do something very, very practical, because I don't want to be like I used to do with my daughters, trying to put the nuts and so on, and something that is missing. So we wanted to do something very practical, very easy to assemble, in and out, and that's it. So that was maybe the reason that we work for something like that we accomplished.
Yeah, I really want to thank the National Building Museum and the Capital Jewish Museum for teaching us all about such an important holiday and its tremendous, beautiful meaning.
I was going to say that growing up, I actually grew up in a very observant household, and every year we would build one, and it was beautiful. This happens to be my favorite holiday. The weather is always really nice, and sitting outside and disconnecting from this concept of being in one space inside and being outside with nature and with family and friends and community. It's really nice, but it's very simple. My family is very strict with the rules, the laws of the sukkah. It's a rectangle with bamboo on the top, and it's very pretty. It's decorated well. We would do an I Spy for the neighborhood, so we would hide things in it, and kids would come and interact with it. And it was really fun. But this was really nice because it was something different, and again, we were more flexible and creative, foster conversation, and so it was very different than what I was used to, which I really, really appreciated. It was very enjoyable.
That's great. And I see a comment in the chat from somebody on the SmithGroup team talking about how one of the most significant parts of this experience for her was to share this tradition and kind of expand upon it and think about what it might mean to non-Jewish participants and visitors. And that's exciting as well. Certainly, I think made me think about the holiday in new ways. That's perfect. I know we're getting a lot of kind of very specific questions about how to obtain a birdhouse. So if you want to kind of put that in the chat or something so everybody can see it, that would be super helpful to that team. And we can also pass that along afterwards. There's a couple other logistical questions about the what's happening to this recording. It's a building museum's recording, so I assume it's going to end up on their website, and hopefully we'll be able to link to it as well on the Capital Jewish Museum website so that everybody can kind of get a chance to hear from all of you. There's some, yeah.
I think Elizabeth's question raises an interesting sort of philosophical discussion that I'd love to hear from the other panelists, where she's basically saying she's apparently, celebrated this holiday as a part of her family before, but what she found inspiring in working on this was being able to share the Jewish traditions in this as an artistic experience without worrying too much about whether or not it's kosher. Mm-hmm. And I know some visitors and some people on, some of the members of this audience here today have thought, wait, that's not kosher, so it doesn't count. And I think it's an interesting question of how important is this installation being kosher? And I'd love to hear other people's views on that.
So I'm not Jewish, but I just wanted to chime in to say that, even someone who I learned about the holiday through this process, and as a Chinese American, we have a Mid-Autumn Festival, which coincides with Sukkot, and it's kind of a lot of similar themes of kind of family and fellowship and celebrating bounty and harvest. So I found that, it was actually really accessible and easy to get into the spirit of the holiday and to think about, what is great about all types of, say, religious or social structures that provide that kind of feeling of fellowship. And I can't really comment on the kosher part of it, but I felt like at least visiting all the structures that, to me, they had that kind of quality that you see in kind of, I guess, sacred spaces, for lack of a better word, or ceremonial spaces.
Well, in my case, that was kind of the challenge when you talk about challenges, because growing up in the Jewish tradition, we see those very simple structure, right? It's like 3 walls of canvas, and they put bamboo on top, and that's the end of the story of the sukkah. So that was the challenge: how to do something that could be a little more creative, sculptural, something simple again, and to create something different. That was the big challenge, being kosher, no? So that was the challenge, and we think that we achieve in some way something like that is something different, not the way that you see every day the sukkah.
Okay. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. It's fine.
All right. So I'll just quickly say that even though the design ultimately may not be fully kosher, I think for us it was super interesting to learn about what makes the design kosher and how to incorporate as many of those elements as possible, and sort of why those elements are important to making the design kosher, like the use of natural materials and kind of like being more connected with nature and the earth. So I think during the fabrication process, and the design process, we thought about all of those things and how we can make it as kosher as possible while retaining, our goals for the design. And yeah, I just thought that process was great. And I thank you for including the rabbi in the conversations, and having him as an educational resource for us. It's really helpful.
That's great. I think it's really interesting to think about what makes traditions important, and to carry kind of pieces of those, and whatever our traditions are, from whatever faith or other type of background. So that's a really neat thing to consider, how things evolve over time. I think we're going to wrap this up. I want to, one of the last questions we got was about whether we're going to do this again next year. So I'm not going to make everybody answer about whether they're in for next year, and I don't want my team to kill me for suggesting it. But I think we'd all be just thrilled to do this again. I think it was a wonderful project, and I really thank all of you on behalf of the Capital Jewish Museum for participating. And I think Caitlin from the Building Museum is going to.
Yeah, I echo Sarah's sentiments from the National Building Museum. Thank you so much to all our panelists. It's really wonderful how differently you interpreted the themes and how differently all your sukkahs turned out. And we're just so impressed. And, you know, I'm really glad to hear that you all had a great experience and made connections with each other. And that, you know, is the whole spirit of the holiday. So that's wonderful. So I hope that everybody who is on this panel tonight gets a chance to see the sukkahs in person if they haven't already. And I'd like to thank you again for tuning into the program. We'd appreciate if you take time to fill out a short survey. As you close your Zoom, you'll be prompted with it. And of course, we invite you to join us on our next online program, Legacies of the World Trade Center, on Monday, September 27th at 6:30, which complements our new exhibition, The Towers of the World Trade Center, 51 Years of Photographs by Camila Jose Vergara. So again, thank you to all our panelists, and thank you to everybody in attendance tonight, and have a great night.